Right. Yeah, that's right. No, I get.
Good afternoon. I'm Ward 5 Councilmember Zachary Parker, the chair of the Committee on Youth Affairs, and I'm calling to order this public roundtable on overcrowding conditions at the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services at the Youth Services Center, or YSC. The time is now 2:08 p.m., and we are conducting this roundtable in person in room 123 of the John A. Wilson Building, online via Zoom, and streaming via the council website and social media. Today's hearing is part of the committee's ongoing work of oversight for DYRS. Since becoming chair of the Committee on Youth Affairs in January of this year, I have visited DYRS's Youth Services Center on Mount Olivet Road in Ward 5 numerous times to assess conditions, meet with impacted youth, and meet with DYRS employees to understand the challenges facing the agency. I've also met with the director and his team to discuss priorities for improvements at the agency. Today's roundtable is another step in this work as we will hear from the director on overcrowding conditions. We will also hear from public witnesses on the critical issue. Overcrowding at YSC is a persistent problem that threatens the safety, dignity, and rehabilitation of young people in DYRS's custody, as well as the staff that work there. YSC, opened in 2004, was built for individualized care, adequate supervision, and access to education, behavioral health services, and recreation. When the capacity is exceeded, every one of these goals is compromised. Reports of youth sleeping in temporary spaces, limited access to showers and programming, and staff shortages only deepen existing challenges. Overcrowding not only increases the risk of conflict and harm inside the facility, but it also undermines the rehabilitative mission that DYRS is meant to uphold. Some facts. YSC is a secure facility originally designed to house 88 beds, and therefore 88 young people. In 2023, a new 10-bed housing unit was opened, raising the effective capacity to 98 beds. Despite the added capacity, the average daily population for fiscal year 24 was about 93 youth at YSC, representing an approximately 40% increase from fiscal year 23. The average daily population has grown rapidly from approximately 40 young people in 2019 to 93 on average in 2024. YSC has been overcrowded 247 out of the last 289 days, 85% of this calendar year alone. To put differently, YSC has been overcrowded every day since April 24th of this year and reached a high water mark of 131 young people on September 10th, 2025. On any given day, it is common to have dozens of youth in secure detention, those that are committed, those that are Title 16, and even PENS cases, persons in need of searching. These populations often need to be kept separated at all times, leading to severe staffing challenges for virtually every activity. Today, October 16th, there are 116 youth at YSC. And again, keep in mind, it is a 98-bed facility. Overcrowding at YSC is not just a numbers problem, it is a safety, fairness, and dignity issue. The data shows that we are beyond warning signs. This is a crisis that demands immediate policy and operational responses. The council has passed and funded key aspects of the Road Act to accelerate placements within DYRS, a major factor for backlogging at YSC. While implementation of the Road Act remains a priority, other questions for the committee include: are there other strategies to accelerate placements? How do we expand in-district treatment and residential capacity? What must be done to strengthen staffing and infrastructure within the agency? I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses to help answer these questions. I am clear, though, the executive must do more to address the crisis that is brewing at DYRS and YSC in particular. We will begin with hearing testimony from public witnesses. I would like to thank each of you for being here today and sharing your expertise with the committee. And with that, I will begin calling our witnesses. First up, we will have—
Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. I am joined by my Ward 8 colleague, Councilmember Trayon White, and I will turn to him for a three-minute statement.
Thank you, Chairman Parker, for calling this a very important roundtable on overcrowding at DYRS. I thank you all who have testified today. The issues at the youth service centers has been long on my radar. I've had several oversight hearings trying to get a consensus on what is going on and how we plan to increase the level of services and care for our youth and young adults housed at our facilities. We know when people are working in healthy, safe, lovable environments, they tend to stay. However, historically, DYRS has had a high staff turnover, and inadequate staffing was a major part of the problem, even including issues with public safety. We've heard from staff who are overworked, insufficiently trained, tired, and sometimes assaulted by kids. I recall that a youth at YSC, where they should have been in secure facility placement, being assaulted by staff and the staff taking their badge and starting fights. Some of this is also due to overcrowdingness. Youth sleeping in non-dormitory spaces in DYRS care is unacceptable. So we are here today to hear answers from the director, from the administration on what we plan on doing to make sure our youth are being rehabbed in this facility. It is my understanding that additional 10 beds has been added to this facility to increase the population from 88 beds to 98 beds. So our number have still reached over 130 youth at a given time. Today, I believe it's 116 youth at YSC, which is still, as you heard, over the number. As a report published in October 2025, youth and youth assaults have been averaging 34.4 per month during the year. There was a known case of a sexual assault between a staffer at YSC and a youth. And we want to show it today that we want to hear from the administration, in addition to the overcrowding, what new policies and procedures are in place to prevent these type of situations from happening again. In closing, YSC is supposed to be a rehabilitation facility, and rehabilitation is in its name and in its mission. We want to ensure that youth do not return to the community as they once went in. We want to ensure they get adequate programming, sleeping in healthy living environments, getting fed right, getting education, getting options to trades and opportunities. And rehabbing our young men and our young ladies in our community is a priority for the city. I hope to hear more from public witnesses and also the administration of DYRS and how we move this agency along so we won't be in the jury M decree again. Thank you, Councilmember Parker. I turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Councilmember White. And I do want to acknowledge the many years of leadership you had in overseeing this agency, and I thank you for being here. And I believe working together with committee members, yourself, we will get to a better place with the agency. And so with that, I'm going to move forward in calling witnesses. First, we will have Tracy Velasquez with the Council of Court Excellence, Eduardo Ferrer, Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic and Initiative, Joshua Miller, Open City Advocates. And we're going to have a slight adjustment because one virtual witness has to leave early. So a point of personal privilege, I'm going to bump him up next. And so we will have virtually David Dominici with the Break Free Education. And so that will be our first panel, and then we'll proceed. With that, Ms. Velasquez, you may begin.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker and members of the committee and the council for holding this roundtable on overcrowding at the Youth Services Center, YSC. My name is Tracy Velasquez, and I'm Policy Director at the Council for Court Excellence. There are two issues which I'd like to raise in my testimony today: youth held in YSC who have been charged as adults under Title 16, and youth in YSC who have been committed to DYRS and are awaiting placement. As you are aware, the population of YSC has risen substantially, in fact, 50% from 83 on October 13th, 2023 to 125 this past Monday, October 13th. The number of people held in a correctional facility is a function of how many folks are admitted and how long they stay. Using DYRS public data for this hearing, CCE analyzed these two factors to identify drivers of overcrowding at YSC. While my written testimony contains the full analysis, CCE found that trends in admissions and length of stay vary significantly by the reason youth are in YSC. In a nutshell, the population at YSC is being driven by an increase in length of stay and admissions of the youth who are already in YSC for the longest time. That is, those charged as adults and those committed and awaiting placement. In looking at youth at YSC in pretrial detention, which is really the reason that YSC was created, there were 3 fewer youth there on Monday than there were 2 years ago. And their average length of stay actually decreased since then. Admissions in September 25 were up by only 4 youth, about 6% compared to the same month in 2023. However, when looking at Title 16 youth and youth awaiting placement, it is a very different story. There are 63% more Title 16 youth in YSC now as compared to 2 years ago, and their average length of stay has ballooned 44% to 112 days. For committed youth awaiting placement, there were twice as many youth in YSC on Monday as there were 2 years ago on that same date. There were also twice as many admissions in September 2025 than there were in September 2023, and their average length of stay is 20% longer. So in looking at who is using up the beds in YSC, it's clear YSC is becoming less and less a place for short-term stays for youth awaiting a delinquency adjudication, and more a facility for youth who have been committed to DYRS or who are being charged in the adult justice system. It was never intended for and is not built for these functions. The reasons for the increase in numbers and lengths of stay are different for these two populations, and as a result, decreasing them will require different solutions. Today, CCE released a report on committed youth awaiting placement in the DC Youth Services Center. I've included the entire document with my written testimony, but I would like to highlight some of the broad themes that those we spoke to and the youth themselves identified. Limited placements available for DC youth with high needs, particularly behavioral health needs, resulting in youth being placed in facilities outside of DC. A lack of space and unwillingness of these out-of-state providers, such as private residential treatment facilities, PRTFs, to serve DC youth. Necessary placement evaluations often take months to be completed. Insurance issues, particularly around Medicaid, are delaying placement. Certain legal documents are required for youth to be placed, which can be difficult and slow to secure. And insufficient collaboration and communication among YSC staff, different agencies, and particularly families and youth. CCE heard these long placements in an overcrowded, increasingly dangerous facility are detrimental to kids there. I want to skip down a little bit because I know I'm almost out of time here. And so given this limited time, I just wanted to touch on the issue of youth charged as adults under Title 16. I want to emphasize charging people under 18 as adults does not actually make them adults. They're still teenagers with the same developmental needs as other teenagers and often much more complex needs. And these youth are also innocent until proven guilty. Data CCE received from the DC Sentencing Commission showed that 30%, almost 1 in 3 youth charged under Title 16 are not convicted. And right now at YSC, these young people are kept separate from their peers, which limits their educational and programming opportunities and further labels and stigmatizes them. We hope, Chairman, that you and other members of the council will continue to speak out against any of the federal attempts to broaden the definitions of youth who can be charged as adults here in DC, as this will only result in even more youth awaiting in YSC awaiting their hearings for federal charges.
And if you could provide your final statement,
Sure.
as you're about a minute over.
I would just say in closing that we also appreciate the work done to help with prevention, including looking at crossover youth and providing services, because obviously keeping youth out of YSC in the first place is the best way to reduce its population. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next, we'll have Mr. Ferrer.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairperson Parker and members of the Committee on Youth Affairs. My name is Eduardo Ferrer. I'm a Ward 5 resident, the Policy Director at the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Initiative, and an Associate Professor at the Georgetown Juvenile Justice Clinic. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding overcrowding conditions at the Youth Services Center. I'll provide some oral testimony today and then submit written testimony for the record before it closes. Addressing overcrowding at the Youth Services Centers requires DYRS finally addressing the awaiting placement population at the facility. As of today, 35 out of the 115 youth at the 98-bed detention facility were youth committed to the agency who are awaiting placement. That means that over 1/3 of the capacity of the facility and just over 30% of the total population of youth at YSC are youth who are committed awaiting placement. As the committee is well aware, the Youth Services Center is currently a detention facility, not a treatment facility. As such, youth who are committed and awaiting placement should be at YSC only a very short period of time after their disposition, if at all. My written testimony will explain in more detail why we should be focused exclusively on the committed awaiting placement population at YSC if we want to reduce overcrowding. In my oral testimony today, I want to address your first question, which was what are other ways that we can expedite placement? And then I'm happy to address other questions as they come up. There are really two ways that I want to talk about today, big picture, that will help address the awaiting placement population. One is to address bottlenecks in the planning process, and two is to address bottlenecks in the placement process. With respect to addressing bottlenecks in the planning process, there are three key things we need to do. We need to disconnect the YLS, completion of the YLS, from the court evaluation process. We need to improve the psychiatric evaluation process. And then we may need to provide additional funding to DBH for additional evaluators, or hire one DBH evaluator to be co-located at YSC to conduct psychiatric evaluations. So I won't testify too much about the first one because I've testified about this in the past. The YLS was meant to be done by lay people. It does not require evaluations in order to complete the YLS CMI. And so DYRS should not be waiting or saying that they need to wait for psychoeducationals or psychiatrics to be completed in order to do their own internal planning processes. Now, that differs a little bit for psychiatrics because they say they need that in order to get reimbursed for PRTFs and certain facilities. But at least for the planning process, determining a young person's level of risk score and type of placement, that can be done without the evaluation process. In terms of improving the psychiatric evaluation process itself, the psychiatric evaluations, which are often needed for Medicaid reimbursement, are done by court order, but they're actually done by DBH Assessment Center. So they're done by a district-controlled agency and a sister agency to DYRS. We should be better about collaborating with our sister agencies in terms of speeding up this process. And then quickly, I'll just mention four things in terms of addressing bottlenecks in the placement process, and I'm happy to elaborate during question and answer. One is to streamline the process for one-off placement contracts for DYRS. Two is to push individualized services into new beginnings that are not currently there. Three is to utilize more medium-level placements. Four is to start reentry planning earlier and address delays in reentry. And then in terms of closing, I just want to be clear on two things. One, we don't need additional detention bed space. We need to figure out our own processes and do what we, the adults, need to do. And then second is that if we invested more in kids, families, and communities on the front end so they didn't become system involved, we wouldn't be having these overcrowding issues in the first place.
Thank you. I always look forward to your name popping up when we have these hearings. Next, we will have Mr. Miller.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Since the summer of 2024, I have been visiting with the Youth Council at YSC on a monthly basis. What I've observed resembles an episode of the anxiety-driven restaurant show, The Bear. Orders pile up while the exhausted team works in constant crunch mode. The kitchen lacks the right ingredients. Animosity festers among staff, and customers keep being seated long after the tables and chairs have run out. In the YSC kitchen, overcrowding is the result of failures both upstream in the community and downstream in placement and procurement delays. It means the staff are dropping or ignoring policy, missing opportunities to fix things, and genuinely overwhelmed. DYRS has been struggling with this kind of dysfunction and overcrowding for at least 2 years. DYRS staff consistently describe the agency as chaotic and mismanaged. Even during yesterday's visit, we learned that policies had been suspended on crucial matters like unit mixing because the situation was so abnormal. Overcrowding leads to beefs, we were told, which leads to further separations, stayaways, movement delays, and programming segregation. Staff and management lurch from crisis to crisis without resolution. Some young people blame the care coordination team for placement delays, describing care coordinators as deceptive, coercive, and unhelpful. I spoke to one young woman who had been accepted to an out-of-state university, but couldn't attend because a GPS monitoring violation left her sitting at YSC. I would posit that a university is a better placement than a jail. A simple example illustrates this dysfunction. In March of this year, young people at YSC told us they wanted a chess club. Georgetown's Carla Talley immediately reached out to Black-led chess clubs across the city, including the Big Chair Chess Club and Chocolate City Chess Club, and secured their interest in volunteering to provide Think Before You Move programming that has succeeded in youth justice settings. She forwarded this information to DYRS leadership on April 7th. 7 months later, the chess club still hasn't begun, though it looks like it may start in November with a Halloween kickoff. We've observed similar delays with other groups offering free services. WeFit, for instance, for athletics, and with donated books from DC Public Library. Volunteer coordination is exhausting work. I understand, and DYRS may not now have the right woman in the job, but these are inspiring community leaders offering transformative programming that could help young people reimagine themselves. It will take dozens of such programs to meet the need, yet the energy bubbling up across the city remains trapped on the outside looking in. The stakes are far higher than in any restaurant. These are our district's children being thrown away, not spoiled meals. But the challenge is the same. YSC needs to efficiently move young people to their next placement, ideally in the community. They need to serve customers and get them out the door. But instead, DC continues to use the facility for long-term detention. We have a roadmap for how to respond to this crisis. During COVID, these facilities prioritized decarceration. Young people were safely transitioned to community settings and the system became more manageable. Certainly, we need to beef up the continuum of care in the community, and I'm happy to discuss community-based alternatives to hardware-secure detention. But it's time to treat overcrowding like the catastrophe it is, and to use the same urgency we showed during the pandemic and take on those same emergency measures again. It's tempting to think we need more beds, but that's like saying that we can solve the problems in the kitchen by having more tables. I think what we know is that that won't work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will have David Dominici.
Hey, council member, thank you for allowing me to be here today. My name is David Dominici. I work with Break Free Education. As some people know, I was one of the co-founders of the Maya Angelou schools, and for a number of years served as the first principal of Maya Angelou out at Oak Hill and then New Beginnings during the intense years of transformation. I still am on board of Maya Angelou and am still actively involved, but I want to be clear, I'm not here speaking on behalf of Maya Angelou. I believe the school has submitted or is submitting its own testimony, and I urge council members to read that testimony. Given the expertise that other people have already provided, I want to skip over some things I've learned about trying to make the systems work better on the front end and on the back end, and rather just share some ideas about what could be done while the facility is overcrowded, which I'm certainly not advocating for. In my role at Break Free, I spend much of my time trying to create situations in juvenile jails around the country where education can really happen in truly transformative ways with kids. And a lot of that means that I end up working with secure care staff and education leadership to try to really radically change the culture of institutions. As other people have mentioned, when youth facilities get overcrowded, they tend to get more violent, and then leadership tends to respond by doing more segregation and resorting to punitive punishment, which then makes them more crowded and makes them more violent. And then rarely do good things happen. Usually something terrible happens, and then we end up in a lawsuit. And current conditions at YSC, although they are not as dire as the early days of JERIA, they do look and sound similar to many of the days under the YSC, under the JERIA consent decree. So a couple quick thoughts in the work that we do around the country to try to mitigate this and make things work better. First, these are very, very hard places to manage. I've worked inside of the Cook County Jail. I've worked in the adult prison and adult jail in New Orleans, the juvenile prison jail in New Orleans. These are very, very hard places. The first things that needs to happen is leadership and all adults need to make it very, very clear philosophically that they believe students matter, they believe in their dignity, and they understand that each student there has a right to education, and that means a complete and full education. And absent being hands-on on the ground, maintaining that sort of sense of mission and purpose is very, very hard given inertia. So the first thing is you need to change the philosophical belief of the institution and work incredibly hard with it. Secondly, you need to establish accountability frameworks. In New Orleans, for example, and in the early days at Maya Angelou, there would be an attendance report, the number of kids who actually get off their units and into the school classrooms, both in the morning and after lunch, in excruciating detail. I urge this to happen at YSC. In New Orleans, I received 4 emails a day, as did the sheriff, the city administrator, the facility director, the lead educators. This creates a real sense of urgency, and it should be done, and it should be done in a way that's transparent and really holds people accountable. And then third and lastly, but probably most importantly, and we've heard some of this already, is that the institution needs to become a place that is based on engagement and relevance. The place where young people find the most engagement and relevance at YSC is and will be by getting up and going to school every day. And that's what should be prioritized. There will be less fights. There will be less challenges because kids will be engaged and motivated. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. So is Councilmember White still on? We will do 5-minute rounds for members. And Councilmember White, if you're still there after my round of questions, I'll turn to you. Ms. Velasquez, in your testimony, you note that almost 30% of Title 16 youth charged as adults are not convicted, yet these children must remain separated from other youth at all times, leading to critical staffing issues. There was an internal decision to house these youth at YSC versus New Beginnings or elsewhere. Would you endorse a policy that allows Title 16 youth to mix with other youth, and why or why not?
Right. We do believe that in general, obviously there are special cases where maybe kids have beefs or something and you don't want to have them together, that these kids should not be isolated from all the other kids. It makes it very difficult to educate them, which I'm sure Mr. Domenici can talk about in terms of having them with other students who are other children who are in the similar grade levels so that these education can be provided. And it's also just very labeling and stigmatizing for these young people. There was one girl who was Title 16, and the choice would have been for her to be in basically solitary confinement. And so they ended up moving her to New Beginnings, and I believe her case was dismissed. So this is, I think, a good example of what happens with the current policy.
Understood. And you also talked about how many youth don't know where they are in the timeline or process. Where do you see the specific breakdowns and keeping young people informed at YSC of where they are on placement?
Right. I think there's 2 avenues. The one avenue that seemed to work the best was the whoever was their lawyer. So generally making sure that they have contact with their lawyers. We did hear when we did our questionnaires, particularly of youth who'd been at YSC, not this January, but recently, that they sometimes had trouble getting in touch with their lawyers. And so that would be one area, but certainly case managers at the facility should be able to help these youth and their families understand what's going on. We heard that kids often become depressed. They don't know how long they're going to be there. They consider this dead time because it's not counting towards any sort of a sentence or amount of time that they're going to have to spend in the facility. And so having them understand where they are in the system, what their placement, what they're looking for and how long it will take would help alleviate some of the stress that they're feeling in their current situation.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. Furr, you highlighted something that came up during the Road Act hearings, which is when these YLS assessments are actually conducted. DYRS is saying, well, we're waiting on the courts to get us the information that we need. And you, like many others, are saying, no, actually, there is no need to wait. But then can you just spell out how might the agency know who actually needs a deeper mental assessment? And how does that come up during the YLS assessment itself, if that makes sense?
Sure. So I think there are a couple different issues at play here. One is where kids should go, and then the other is how we pay for things. The YLS CMI is a risk needs instrument. So it should tell us how risky is this kid, or what does this young person need in order to mitigate those risks? And if we address those in the right way, then it makes them a lot less risky, which means they can either be in the community or we may need to put them into a facility. Okay. That can be done without a psychological evaluation or a psychiatric evaluation. When you look at the YLS manual, it's done usually through collateral interviews and record checks, school records, past behavioral health records, maybe, et cetera. The psychiatric evaluation is needed when the agency wants to bill Medicaid for a particular placement. And so they would need to wait for the psychiatric evaluation to be done in order to then get reimbursed. But if DYRS wants to pay for it itself, it doesn't actually need that evaluation either. It could decide we're going to place a kid in a residential treatment center
But
and we're
is
going to
there
pay
at
for it
any
directly.
point during that YLS assessment where I would need that psychiatric evaluation to inform the risk?
No. The YLS assessment was designed to be done by lay people without the need for those level of evaluations.
Got it. Understood. Mr. Miller, you stated the solution to overcrowding is not building better or bigger facilities. And I hear you, like one of the things is to accelerate the placement and getting young people out of the facility. I also appreciate you thinking about like community placements. There has been a tendency in more recent time to actually keep young people in detention. One, I guess there's not a question there. I think we're in alignment there. That part of the concern I have is that these young people are sitting, they're not getting credit for the time. They're not getting rehabilitative services. Oftentimes, they're supposed to receive education services, but even then we know that that's not happening. So that's certainly something that I will bring up with the director. And I know time is ticking, but Mr. Domenici, I want to thank you, one, for your service and work in the education space. I agree with you wholeheartedly that prioritizing education services for these young people are or is paramount. One thing do you have any insight to what the educational services or the quality thereof look like in your expertise at YSC versus other places?
Honestly, council member, I'm not there enough. I do talk with the executive director every couple of weeks, but I'm not there to comment on that specifically. But I think that the team at Maya Angelou could do that. I do know that currently, awful lot of young people are getting things like getting a half day of school, or young people are getting educated because Maya is sending teachers to the learning pods, and no place in the country does learning on the learning pods actually equate to meaningful learning. I visit places all over the place. So the number one priority is getting kids off of the learning pods into a learning space. And even the best hardworking teacher and the most committed staff at Maya will not succeed in doing what we want to have happen with young people when they have to go to the living units to try to teach kids, or when kids are only getting to come for a few hours a day, which I think is an accurate assessment.
Absolutely. And actually, when you were sharing your testimony, that is my reflection, that those learning pods, that the young people are pretty much educated in their housing units. And you're talking about age groups that could range from 13, 14 to 17. And you have one teacher that's trying to mitigate all of the needs that are there at differing levels. So thank you for your testimony.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember White, I will turn to you for a round of questions.
Yes, real quick. I just want to ask, uh, based on the report you talked about to use, what was your methodology to creating this report? What kind of research went into getting the facts to create this report?
Councilmember, it sounds like your internet may be glitching, but if I heard you correctly, what was the methodology that informed the research for your report? And I believe that's for Ms. Velasquez.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, great. There were a couple of different things that we did in our youth awaiting placement report. One is we had several roundtables, sort of focus groups. I will say that DYRS was invited and they did not attend, but it included many other people from the system, including folks from CFSA, DBH, CSSD, as well as family members and youth who had previously been at YSC. And we met over 2 days, 2 half days, and asked them a lot of the questions about what they saw as the issues around youth awaiting placement and how those could be addressed. We also worked with lawyers who had the lawyers of kids at YSC who had recently been at YSC, and they answered questionnaires. They were voluntary. We went through the usual sort of human subjects protections of making sure they knew that their identity would be protected. And we collected surveys from these youth and asked a series of questions about, do you feel safe? Are you accessing programming? Those sorts of questions. And at the back of our report, you'll see it has a list of the 2 questionnaires that we used. So, and then we just looked at basic data from DYRS and used that to sort of inform our recommendations. But I would say that the recommendations basically came from the community and those who are familiar with YSC.
Thank you. So for clarity, you all did it through a survey to get the youth input through the lawyer, the accurate.
Right. Yeah, we had a questionnaire that the lawyers brought in with them and asked youth if they would be willing to fill out. And I would just also add that our thanks to the Juvenile Justice Advisory Group, JJAG, who asked us to do this work about a year ago. And they helped us to bring together folks to answer the questions.
All right. And there has been some ongoing discussion about out-of-state placement. I want to know, based on what you noticed and what you gathered, what is your opinion about the quality of services of out-of-state placement for youth in our system? Right,
and we did not talk with youth who had been in PRTFs or other out-of-state placements, but heard a lot of concern about them being placed out of state. I would say that, I know that the district is looking at, or is the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council is doing a study of potentially opening a PRTF in the district. I would just like to reinforce what Mr. Miller said about looking for the least restrictive placements and looking at whether there are other options such as treatment foster care that could be used for youth with high levels of needs that wouldn't involve locked facilities, even in the district. So, certainly we want to bring these kids home where they can be under our better supervision, under the, more watchful eyes of the council and others. So, but definitely thinking about, does that have to be another locked facility? And we know that PRTFs nationally have had a lot of issues around neglect and sometimes abuse.
Thank you. I want to jump to Mr. Ferreira. Thank you for showing up. I always look forward to your opinion and introspection of where we are and what we need to do to improve. One of the things I am concerned about that you mentioned was age. I believe that our young people are seeing and experiencing that youth, especially in reach and in the community, that has a experience impact on their mental health, their well-being, and
Sorry, Councilmember, you're glitching again, and this time it's harder to make out.
Yes.
If you could just repeat your question. I think you were glitching when you were speaking before.
Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now and you're clear.
Oh, great. So I was asking Mr. Ferrer how these envision a stronger partnership with DBH and DYRS because the many mental health issues that youth and young adults face in our city, from trauma to violence to neglect to homelessness to hopelessness. And how do he envision a stronger partnership, if any, with DBH and DYRS?
I would love for them to partner more closely. I have never understood why DBH is not co-located at YSC. One of the ways that we reduce the population at YSC is by getting kids into the community more quickly. And so on the detained side, for instance, the second a young person's detained, if you want to try and connect them to a core services agency, having either DBH or, one core services agency assigned per day of the week to the facility to do intakes, make referrals, and connect young people to services in the community so that the next time they go into court, they can be released is another way, for instance, to reduce the awaiting placement population and improve outcomes. Because what we know about detention is that it actually undermines public safety, causes more harm to the young people, makes it more likely that kids are going to drop out of school and end up in the adult system, right? All the things that we don't want for young people. So finding creative ways to partner with an agency like DBH to get connected to actual community-based services that will be effective in reducing recidivism and promoting that young person's thriving are things that DYRS and DBH should be looking at together.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for your testimony. I'm going to call the next panel. And I'm not sure if it is me, but it is warm in this room. So I'm going to ask team members if you could just open the doors so there could be circulation. But next we will have Anya Kreider with the Disability Rights DC, Cesar Toledo with the Wanda Austin Foundation, Taya Bell, the School Justice Project, and Cheryl Duarte, Public Witness. You on your Kreider? Okay. And Cesar Toledo is your bill online. Yep. And then is Cheryl Duarte online? Nope. So we will call up JP Skemkowitz. I think I almost had it. And with that, Ms. Kreider, you may begin.
Good afternoon, Chairmember Parker and members of this committee. My name is Anya Kreider, and I'm an attorney at Disability Rights DC and a proud Ward 5 member. Disability Rights DC is the federally designated protection and advocacy program for people with disabilities in DC. Disability Rights DC continues to be concerned about the time youth spend secluded in their rooms, particularly under circumstances of overcrowding. DC law does not allow for seclusion or room confinement based on intake or orientation status on the medical unit as a mechanism for accommodating separation orders or by implementing split time on a given unit. We recommend that DYRS track all room confinement, regardless of whether they believe it is improper or not, thereby tracking and reporting any time youth are in their rooms outside of sleeping hours or facility-wide lockdown. It is our understanding that at this time, YSC has no meaningful way of keeping track of such confinement violations beyond handwritten logs that are not digitized or analyzed. DYRS is obligated to provide a seclusion report annually to the DC Council. The DC Council should ensure that DYRS meets this obligation and inquires into the tracking practices producing this data. Additionally, DYRS must ensure youth with disabilities, including physical, mental, and behavioral health disabilities, have equal access to services, programs, and activities. Our experiences with youth at YSC raises concerns that DYRS does not always meet this obligation. Unsurprisingly, overcrowding only heightens these concerns. For example, as we have been in ongoing communication with DYRS about the operation of the medical suite at YSC, our understanding is that youth are sometimes on the medical unit for extended periods of time, for example, as the result of a broken bone or surgery recovery. The youth staying in the medical unit generally receive limited education services and do not receive an opportunity for large muscle activity, even when the reason they are on the unit would not prevent them from, for example, getting a walk in the gym or courtyard. Additionally, these youth generally only receive time out of their cells and time on the intake unit permits. YSC staff has committed to creating a schedule for the medical unit, and we look forward to receiving that schedule soon. Nevertheless, these youth should not be segregated from the general population if they are largely healthy out of fear that they will not be able to protect themselves or staff concern that they are not able to restrain these youth. Such concerns are indicative of a larger issue. Concerns regarding accommodations for youth with disabilities also arise in the educational space, as well as in regards to the development and execution of behavior intervention plans. Please see our written testimony for details on these topics, as these are abbreviated comments. Thank you for this committee's efforts, your recent legislation addressing room confinement, and for this opportunity to submit testimony.
Thank you for your testimony. And I don't believe we have your written testimony.
Yes, we will submit it following.
Awesome. And I
Thank you.
would say that for others that were on the previous panel, if you could please submit your written testimony, that is helpful for us. Next, we have Mr. Toledo.
Councilmember Parker, thank you so much for hosting today's hearing. My name is Cesar Toledo. I am a Ward 6 resident and the Executive Director for the Wanda Alston Foundation. We provide housing and support for queer youth who previously experienced homelessness. I'm here to raise concerns about the overcrowding conditions at DYRS, but also to spotlight the direct connection between homelessness and victimization, which leads to some of the issues we're going to be talking about today. One thing I wanted to make sure I spotlighted was this: in July of this year, NBC4 reported that a trans girl placed in a male unit suffered a broken jaw after being attacked by a group of youth. I know you're familiar with this incident and you spoke about it to the reporter, and it was covered by national news. That same investigation also revealed that there have been about 51 assaults reported by the youth from which is one of the highest ever recorded since it started tracking in 2023. So really, this crisis highlights a system that needs urgent reform. As a housing provider for queer youth, I just want to spotlight kind of like the deep connection between incarceration and LGBTQ youth. The Williams Institute found that 54% of incarcerated LGBTQ youth reported experiencing 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, right, including various forms of abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, in contrast to 6% of non-LGBTQ youth in public schools. A study by the American University College of Law found that LGBTQ youth represent 20% of all youth in juvenile justice systems, despite only representing 5 to 7% of all U.S. youth population. They also found that queer youth are 3 times more likely to have been removed from their home by social workers compared to straight youth. So it's clear that queer youth, especially those of color, are disproportionately funneled into the prison to school pipeline. We know that identity-based rejection and marginalization set off a cascade of risks, including school disengagement, homelessness, and unsafe survival behaviors. We know that these disparities stem largely from family rejection and a lack of acceptance at home because of a sexual orientation or gender identity. To survive, queer youth are often forced to rely on survival strategies that place them at risk for contact with law enforcement and further victimization. At the Wanda Alston Foundation, we would say about 1 in 4 of our youth that we house have had some form of involvement in the criminal justice system and face unique challenges rebuilding their lives as they try to find stable housing. As youth re-enter our community and attempt to find a safe housing, we must expand culturally competent transitional housing programs that offer safety, support, stability, and a real pathway out of the prison pipeline. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Tayo Bill, who I believe is online.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. My name is Teo Bell, and I'm the Deputy Director at School Justice Project, SJP, as well as a Ward 4 resident. SJP is a DC-based legal services and advocacy organization that provides special education representation to older, court-involved students with disabilities. My testimony will address the overcrowding at YSC and its impact on education for students detained in the facility. My full remarks are part of my written submission. Unfortunately, the issue of overcrowding is not new to our office, and we have recently been retained by a number of young people and their parents to help them access their education while they're detained at YSC. As such, my testimony today will also include a short anecdote of a client story we have recently learned of and how the high numbers of young people at YSC have resulted in educational deprivations to the students in the facility. The district has a legal obligation to provide detained young people with access to education. Importantly, for young people without identified disabilities, the district also has a compulsory education statute, which mandates that students ages 5 through the age in which they reach majority must attend school. For students with disabilities, which impact their ability to learn, that requirement is heightened. Both federal and local laws mandate various individualized supports and services be implemented in accordance with each student's individualized education program, or IEP. Needless to say, with so many students detained in a space meant for far fewer young people, these educational needs are often going unmet. One example of this is a 16-year-old client who SJP represents, who is charged under Title 16, who has been held at YSC for the past month. During that time, he has not been able to attend a majority of the school day because there are not enough staff members to meet the ratio of young people to DYRS staff to move back and forth to the classrooms. In fact, it's our understanding that DYRS's practice or policy requires one staff member per every 8 young people to even allow them out of their cells. When that ratio is not met, however, DYRS has indicated that it can only bring out half of the students to class while the other students remain in their cells. And so this is very similar to my colleague David Dominici's testimony about the learning pods. This client has not been able to receive behavioral support services in addition due to DYRS's inability to move so many young people around the facility due to the staffing shortages. Similarly, SJP represents another client, a 17-year-old who is held in the intake unit, not a unit that provides school, throughout the duration of his detention at YSC. He was also not provided the educational supports he is entitled to receive under law. We urge this committee to inquire further into the educational issues that have arisen as a direct result of the overcrowding at YSC, in addition to all the other issues that my fellow panelists have noted today. And we thank you in advance for your support and engagement on this issue.
Thank you. Next, we will have Cheryl Duarte, who I don't believe is here. We will have JP Skimkwitz. Next.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker, Councilmember White, and members of the council. I appreciate you for allowing me the opportunity to testify today. My name is JP Simkwitz. I'm a 5th-generation resident of the District of Columbia, and I'm serving in my 4th term as Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner for the Foxhall area of our city. I'm testifying on my own behalf and not on behalf of Advisory Neighborhood Commission 3D. My family and educational background informs my testimony today. My mom is a former social worker whose job was to place significantly at-risk children in appropriate and caring foster homes. My dad served as an officer in the United States Marine Corps, and at the beginning of my legal career, I prosecuted juveniles accused of crimes, and in later years, I defended children in court who were accused of violating criminal acts. So I believe that I can speak to all of the sides of this complicated issue of juvenile justice. It is essential to solve the problem of overcrowding at the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. The constitutional rights of our children housed there demand this. In addition, the focus of the juvenile justice system is on rehabilitation and not punishment. Therefore, if children are housed in our programs, the service center that is not designed for individuals to sleep, and if there are more children there than the capacity allows, there's a significant likelihood that these children will not receive the rehabilitation services and educational instruction while they are there that is essential for when they are released or move on to their next placement. With that said, our crime rate has increased significantly in recent years, and the District of Columbia is in a crime crisis. A major driver of this crime wave has been youthful offenders. In reviewing current crime statistics, one thing is clear. There are certain children that need to be placed in secure detention facilities, not to punish them, but to protect society from their criminal acts. If there are no available beds in our secure detention facilities, a child who has committed a violent act may have to be placed in a less restrictive environment, which is not good for society because the children would then be free to traumatize additional victims. There should be a rebuttable presumption in our criminal justice system that secure detention is the default when an individual, including a child, commits a criminal act involving serious personal and physical violence, including crimes involving guns or knives, attacks with the intent to kill or maim, sexual offenses, and carjackings. The rights of criminals should not supersede the rights of law-abiding citizens to be safe in their homes, schools, and streets. There must be consequences for criminal actions. Therefore, I urge the council to fund the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services to provide additional beds in secure detention facilities for children whose freedom, unfortunately, must be taken away in order to protect society. In doing so, I urge the council to also fund programs within these secure detention facilities that provide the necessary rehabilitation services and educational opportunities for those children residing there, as well as their families, so that when these children return to society, the chance of returning to a life of crime is minimized. If society simply builds more detention facilities, but yet does not provide the necessary services to go along with that, we're not solving anything. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And that's Commissioner Zimkowitz. Sorry for mispronouncing.
Thank you.
And I believe that is it for that panel. I will begin my 5-minute round and then turn to others. I will start with you, Commissioner Zimkowitz. One, I appreciate you reflecting on the need for services, especially education services for young people at YSC and DYRS in general, as well as acknowledging overcrowding impacts our ability to provide those services. We're fully aligned there. I was intrigued by your thought of giving DYRS the necessary funding or more funding in order for them to secure the beds. One of the things I'm hoping to learn from the director today, is it a money issue? I'm not persuaded it is. I think we just have a finite amount of space at YSC that no longer meets our needs. One of the things that the council has done, as I mentioned, was we fully funded the Road Act, which is meant to get more young people into placement out of YSC. And the thought is if we can move young people in and out quicker, we will address the overcrowding issue. I will also say for the record, I am well aware that the director and his team are looking at other avenues in terms of facilities, and I don't want to get too far ahead of him. But the agency is exploring all options to see what is possible. But one, I wanted to, again, thank you for your testimony. Caesar, or Mr. Toledo, I wanted to come to you to talk about LGBTQ youth. What do you think DYRS should be doing more to support LGBTQ youth in its care?
Yeah, I just want to be transparent. I'm not an expert and fully aware of all those details, but first and foremost, I just would love for the investigation. I still haven't gotten the final readout of what took place when we had that incident when the trans girl had her jaw broken when she was attacked by a group of young men. So I think first and foremost, I would love to learn more about the process and how our queer youth are protected within the facility. I think the overcrowding creates a dangerous, life-threatening environment for some of our most vulnerable people from our queer community. And so first and foremost, I just want to learn more about those processes and those procedures because clearly it's an urgent crisis.
Absolutely. And some of the stats that you provided were staggering, that 1/4 of the youth that your organization is working with are system involved, or that 20% of young people within the LGBTQ community will at some point become system involved. And we know that that is related to housing instability, economic instability, and a host of other issues and traumas. So thank you for your work in that space.
Yes, and I would just like to add, in terms of placement, our case managers who are on the front lines working with these youth who previously left the system. You know, they work hand in hand with probation officers. They work hand in hand with them to be able to rehabilitate them, provide them the services that they need to reenter society and to find permanent housing. And so we appreciate your support and we appreciate you uplifting the good work that we're doing on the front lines.
Thank you. Ms. Kreider, are you familiar with approaches at other facilities in other jurisdictions where seclusion and other data is collected in more systematic ways than paper logs?
Thank you for the question. I, off the top of my head, cannot speak to that. I can say that in a conversation with YSC administrators, they have alluded to the fact that they've requested funding for a more digitized version. So I don't know specifics of that, but it is something that they raised interest in. And I can't speak to our position on that without further details from them.
Understood. And for clarification, when you testified about the amount of time some young people are spending in their rooms, I imagine you mean their like cell or their units. Is that accurate? Got it. Okay. And then Ms. Bill, how many young people is SJP working with at DYRS or representing?
I don't have the exact number of that right now. I'd have to go through our case management system and find out, but that it's a decent amount of young people. Specifically, we represent a lot of the T16 young people. So that tends to be the population that we're working with the most these days.
Understood. I would just say I am keenly aware of the challenges with education, and it has been something I've been laser focused on, ensuring that more of the young people there are receiving a quality education. In fact, this committee funded additional resources for educational services for the young people there that is yet to get out the door. And so that is something I'm also aware of and pushing, but I want to thank you for your advocacy in this space. So with that, I'm going to turn to Councilmember White. And it seems like he may have dropped off. So with that, thank you all for your testimony. And then we have one more witness before we get to our government witness, and that is Tara Martin with Raise One, Teach One, Delano Martin Foundation. And whenever you're ready, you may begin. Make sure you push the red, so you see the red light. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Councilman Parker and everyone of the committee. I'm testifying because I'm very aware of what's going on, but I also have children that's been through the system and been there, and I have been there too. One of my biggest concerns is, what do we have before they go there? So let me say this, before my kids hit the juvenile system, they were not given anything. The only way you get a violent interrupter or an incredible messenger, you have to be committed to DYRS. I didn't know that when I reached out to them. We have to have something before we get to that point. When you have families like myself, asking them for services because you see your child going down a path of failure, you know, and so he had to get a charge to get the incredible messenger he got. And that's not fair to me, him, or the system. And we talking about overcrowding. Majority of those kids over there could have been prevented from going there if they had services in place. All your services that you provide in the District of Columbia, you have to be committed to DYRS. And that's not fair. When you have all these organizations out here saying and asking for funding and they never get funded, or they never get that same ability that they get when they dealing with DYRS, you know, and I just think DYRS need to really look at leadership. Leadership is a big problem. And the reason why they short of staff, they can't keep staff. They can't keep staff because you not placing our children right. My son had an IEP, and he didn't get no services while he was committed in DYRS. He didn't get the proper education. He got 30 minutes. So while we have truancy the way we do, is because when they get out there, they only get a half a credit. And you gotta do, he was there for 6 months. That didn't count. He went to Challenge Academy, tried to get him back in school. Parker, he's 17. Councilman Parker, he's 17 with 9th grade credits. And he sat there for 6 months. So when we talking about all of this, we have to, you gotta have people like me at the table. Stop making bills and stop defending them when we're never at the table. We're never at the table with Sam Abed. He doesn't listen. I have written him multiple memos. I have 11 whistleblowers. I know everything go on day by day. Day by day. Enough is enough. Be fair to our children. When you're making these bills for them, have parents at the table. Have your community at the table. I mean, I just think that's fair.
No, thank you for your testimony and your passion. Just a few things. I do have like 2 questions. One, just for clarification. So your 17-year-old was in the custody of DYRS for 6 months, but didn't receive full credit for the education received.
No.
But when you say he only had a 9th grade level of credits, can you just clarify what you meant by that?
So when I registered, I had to register him in school once he left Challenge.
Yes.
He didn't want to go to a public school or a charter school, so we ended up giving him, Challenge ended up putting him in an alternative school on 16th Street because of his credits. He would have had to go to 9th grade. His siblings that's younger than him were in the 10th and the 11th. So he just dropped out.
I see.
If you understand
And
what I'm
that's because
saying.
of that 6-minute or 6-month block
So that's it.
credits that weren't accepted.
So he kept going back and forth to DYRS every time. And so finally they set him down once he got committed. So every time they go to DYRS, the education part was not, it take 5 days to take him out their regular system.
I got
And
it.
then it's never counted. So all the times that our children are going in and out of YSC, their education stopped, their credit stopped.
Understood. And as I'm sure you're aware, one of the bills that I introduced last week as part of the Care for Youth plan is to ensure that LEAs accept the credits, that they are forced to accept the credits that are earned by young people in the care of DYRS.
Yeah, but the credits is only a half a credit, and me and the principal of my Angelo have had this discussion, and one of the discussions was, why is it only a half a credit? Like they do a whole year there, it's only a half a credit.
We will look into that, but it is my expectation that young people should receive every bit of credit as they transition out, and that there should be transitional support. Last thing I would say is I fully agree with your sentiment that if we preempted more of our supports for these young people, that fewer of them would end up in the system. I don't know if that's on DYRS though. We do have agencies like the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement and others that are doing outreach or should be doing outreach to disrupt cycles of violence. DYRS is an agency, it has its own issues, and I'm happy to challenge the director on that. But I think it would be unreasonable for us to expect that one agency to kind of provide resources for all young people across the district.
No, that's
Although
not
we
what I
need
was
to do
saying.
that.
No, that's not what I was saying. Basically, you have to have a charge to get the services.
No, I get, and what I
And then
offer.
you get, and then that's the other thing I want you to ask Sam Abed. Where's their re-entry program? My son just got out of DYRS from being committed May of 2025 with no plan. They just set my baby out on the street.
And well, I'll end here. In terms of the credible messengers, violence interrupters, other things, that is a resource that the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement is actively working to push out. And then in terms of transitional work, I fully agree with you. The agency should be strengthening that. it is my understanding that they are now in the space of standing up that team, and that is something I will be asking the director about. But I want to again thank you for your testimony
Thank you.
and your constant engagement.
Thank you.
Awesome. The time is now 3:15. I see we have the director with us. I'm going to entertain a 5-minute short recess, and then we will turn directly to you, Director Abed. So with that, we will recess for 5 minutes and then resume.
Okay.
It's like we're listening to.
Absolutely.
Hi, how are you?
All right, I'm gonna call this roundtable back into order. And I am joined by Director Sam Abed of the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. Director Abed, it is a requirement of the council that all government witnesses be sworn in. Could you please raise your right hand and repeat after me? I solemnly swear that the testimony.
I solemnly swear that the testimony.
Well, I guess we'll do this. I'm not gonna have you repeat. I'll just say, raise your right hand. I will say it and you just affirm. I solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide the committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I will.
Okay, awesome. And with that, you may give your testimony.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Parker and members of the Committee on Youth Affairs, as well as members of the public that are watching and here today. I'm Sam Abed, Director of Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today regarding conditions at DYRS Youth Services Center. I want to begin by recognizing Mayor Bowser and Deputy Mayor Apia for their continued leadership and commitment to both public safety and youth rehabilitation. Their support allows DYRS to pursue its dual mission of holding youth accountable for their actions while providing them with the structure, guidance, and services needed to promote long-term success. I also want to extend my appreciation to the dedicated staff of DYRS. Managing secure facilities during periods of high population presents real challenges, yet our team continues to show professionalism, compassion, and resilience. Every day they work to maintain a safe and therapeutic environment that supports positive youth development even under difficult circumstances. While overcrowding places strain on our resources, it also highlights the strength and commitment of our staff and partners. Together, we remain focused on improving facility operations, expanding service capacity, and ensuring that every youth receives the individualized care and accountability that will help them return to their communities stronger and more prepared to succeed. The district's juvenile system currently distributes core responsibilities across several agencies. Court Social Services and the Attorney General's Office handle intake and diversion. Court Social Services oversees pretrial supervision as well as probation. DYRS manages commitment, placement, and aftercare. This fragmented structure limits the district's ability to manage detention population pressures, ensure consistency in risk assessment, and provide seamless care for youth from their first point of system contact through reentry into the community. Unifying intake, diversion, authority, pretrial supervision, probation, and commitment services under one coordinated juvenile justice agency would enable DYRS to implement a continuum of services grounded in risk, need, and responsivity principles. This structural integration would give the district the ability to manage the detention population more effectively by applying consistent decision-making tools and expanding community-based alternatives. A unified system would allow DYRS to develop and implement a detention risk assessment instrument, a validated tool used at the point of intake to guide detention decisions. The DRA would also ensure that only youth who pose a significant public safety or flight risk are held in secure detention, while others are directed to appropriate community-based supervision and supports. This would reduce unnecessary detention, improve outcomes, and maintain public safety. Within a unified framework, DYRS would be positioned to create a comprehensive range of alternatives to detention and diversion services tailored to youth risk and need profiles. We would employ a shortened version of the youth level of service with a YLS assessment, the same evidence-based tool currently used for committed youth to guide front-end decision-making. Using a single integrated assessment system ensures consistency across the continuum, allowing data from early intervention to inform service planning during commitment and reentry. With these tools, DYRS could divert low-risk youth from court processing, provide targeted supports through achievement centers and community partners, and maintain supervision for moderate-risk youth using structured community programs, electronic monitoring, and family engagement. Secure detention would then become a narrowly used option reserved only for high-risk youth who cannot be safely supervised in the community. Unification would also give the district the ability to manage its detention population dynamically, aligning available beds with validated risk levels rather than system bottlenecks or agency silos. Moreover, aligning juvenile intake, diversion, supervision, and commitment under a single data and management system would provide the mayor, the council, and the public with a clearer picture of how youth move through the system and how interventions affect outcomes. In summary, unifying the district's juvenile justice system would transform fragmented processes into a coherent continuum of care. With unified authority, DYRS could implement standardized risk assessments, develop meaningful alternatives to detention, and manage detention populations responsibly and safely. This reform would enhance public safety, reduce recidivism, and deliver fairer, more effective services for youth and families in the District of Columbia. In addition to these written comments, I would also add, as you know, Mr. Chairman, that the agency has been engaged in searching for additional facility space. We have engaged with the state of Maryland to either acquire or lease a property that is about 3 miles away from New Beginnings to be used for detention. We're awaiting a response from the state. We're also considering what capital projects and space that we can utilize at YSC. As you mentioned earlier in the hearing, we do have very limited amounts of space at YSC, but there is some space that we are looking at to see if an additional unit could be constructed on the current site. So I wanted to make the committee and you, Mr. Chairman, aware of that. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you. And I am aware of the work that you're leading, trying to secure more space. It's also a reminder of just how challenging, complex, and slow some of these things are, which doesn't align with the crisis brewing because we have overcrowding right now. And all of the things that you mentioned are likely longer term prospects, but I appreciate the work going into it nonetheless. Director, your testimony pointed to unification as a necessary step. Can you provide an update on the unification plan the executive is set to produce under the Road Act Section 5, which this committee funded via the Council's Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety this budget cycle?
Yes, the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety is preparing that plan. We are working with her, and I anticipate that we'll have it by the timeline that's in the statute.
And what I'm taking from your testimony is that that work is how you see us addressing overcrowding, but also improving efficiencies across the system.
Absolutely. We have very few tools that we can use to manage the population in detention because we are not part of the system that develops the risk assessments of youth when they come into intake. We don't make recommendations to court. We're not even in court to.
But on that risk assessment, the YLS, we heard testimony today.
No, the risk assessment is not the YLS. The YLS is a needs assessment. What I'm talking about is a detention risk assessment instrument that should be utilized at the point of intake to determine whether someone should be detained. And that is looking at factors that, relate to the level of the offense, the underlying offense, chronicity or past criminal behavior, any failures to appear or other abscondence risks. Because the two things that we're looking at for, or the two factors that we're really interested in for detention, pretrial detention is, are you going to commit another crime while we're waiting for your court date? And are you going to show up for court, right? Those are the two things. And so a detention risk assessment instrument is a brief instrument that can be utilized to zero in on those factors, give a risk score, and then inform the court or, what could we do? In addition to the risk assessment tool, the risk assessment, you generally will see these with low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. Obviously, the high risk youth are the ones that we would recommend detention for. Low risk youth are the ones we would recommend for staying in the community. And it's the moderate risk youth that generally are the ones where we have to develop that system of community intervention and alternatives to detention. So those would be things like using GPS monitoring, pretrial services supervision, using, if the agency had diversion authority, using that as a tool as well to say, hey, you don't even have to go through the criminal justice process if you will agree to do these things that we know are necessary for you to deter this behavior.
But when I look at the placement decisions, it is clear that the agency has seemingly moved away from more community-based placements for secure detention. And so am I to interpret that as more young people are high risk now?
So let me just clarify one thing. Youth in detention, we have no discretion over. They are ordered by the court to stay in detention awaiting their trial.
Yes.
Committed youth, once they've been adjudicated delinquent and committed, we have release authority for those youth. And the issue with putting kids back in the community once they have been committed to DYRS is that, yes, number one, they do have a high risk profile. They have a high level of offense generally. But the way you would do a community-based plan is by having probation provide supervision. That is generally the tool that you use for community-based supervision once you're past the pretrial stage.
Understood.
So the recommendation could
not
be
to conflate those things, but the young people awaiting placement, once the decision to place them, the trend of the agency in recent years has been not to send them back to community under supervision of probationary officers or services, but to keep them in detention or to put them in a more secure facility, even if that's outside of DC.
right,
And
because
what we heard testimony today, and we've continued to hear testimony, is why not try to get more of those young people out of YSC or out of secure detention back into community-based placements?
so again, so the bulk of the youth at YSC are awaiting trial. So we're talking about committed youth and placing committed youth into the community. And we do that on some occasions. And it is a reflection of the level of offenses that we're dealing with.
How many committed youth awaiting placement are at YSC now?
I believe about 30 youth awaiting placement. Let me get the exact number.
And if, as a follow-up, it would be great if you could approximate how many of those 30 or so youth would be low or medium risk?
We don't do a risk assessment like I described.
So I'm seeing 34, which is
Sorry,
30.
34.
Just ballpark for me. How many of those young people do you anticipate being in community-based placements?
I don't believe any of those are going to be in community-based placements, or we would have placed them in the community.
But isn't that part of the problem?
No, I don't believe that is the problem, because we have to understand that when a youth is committed to DYRS, the court had the option of putting a youth on probation and keeping them in the community, and
Right.
chose not to do that. And so unless
So that they could
are committing
receive
for,
certain services,
I'm sorry?
so that they could receive certain rehabilitative services through
Sure.
detention or whatever the placement may
No,
may
but
be.
no, if they're in probation, if they're on probation supervision, then they're not detained. They're in
I
the
know,
community.
but that I'm giving that as a rationale for why a judge may opt for not releasing a young person on probation. It's so that they could receive those rehabilitative services
Sure.
in detention or
In a
commu-
committed status.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
In a committed placement. And so putting them back into the community is tantamount to saying, well, we just disagree with you, Judge. We think that they can just be back in the community.
Let me ask it this way. Is it the position of your team and the executive that community-based placements should be the last resort for young people committed to DYRS?
No, community-based placements should be, community-based placements should be used earlier in the process before a young person is committed. That is the purpose of having probation. is to have an option for putting a youth into the community with supervision. That is what probation is. Now, if we had a unified system, yes, we would
But
certainly use probation as a tool.
But community-based services or community-based placements and probation are not necessarily synonymous. And so, and I would just be honest, I think many would acknowledge court social services or our probation services are not great. Full stop. There are young people that have monitors that are not working. There's probation officers that are not following up with young people. There are young people on probation that are going out to commit more crimes, carjacking, et cetera. So, I don't necessarily see those two things the same. And in full disclosure, I've had these conversations about probation services with our federal partners, and we'll continue to push there. I just want to come at this a different way again. We have an overcrowding issue. It seems to me there's numerous factors for that, including Title 16 youth being housed at YSC. But one factor is that there is a choice being made that instead of less secure placements, DYRS is waiting sometimes for many, many months to place young people in secure placements when they could take another alternative. And it's creating a backlog. So if we have 34 youth awaiting placement, I would imagine at least 2/3 of those would have to fall somewhere in the range of low to medium risk.
No, I don't believe that they are low to medium risk.
Okay. Do you have
I don't have the information about their profiles. What I will say is that a young person that is low risk should never make it into our system. They should be using diversion authority. And I know that the Attorney General exercises diversion authority. Oftentimes, when you see a kid committed to DYRS, they have had a bite or two at the apple with diversion.
Yes.
Then they have had a time or two or more with the probation system, and then they get committed. And so that is the population that we're serving. The other thing that I would point out to you is that the youth that are awaiting placement are not all awaiting placement directly from court. Many of them have been in a placement, absconded, or have been ejected from those programs, and then they come back to await a subsequent placement. And so it isn't a linear process.
What number or percentage of youth would you say that last category
I'll have to
represents?
come back with data on that.
Okay.
But we
So
do
today
have
is the oversight hearing, but I would love to have the follow-up on that. And what we're trying to get at is how do we address overcrowding? And what we're pushing on are different factors. That leads me to Title 16 youth. As was mentioned, and I think it was a reasonable choice. There was a choice made to house the Title 16 youth at YSC because of their unique status. You also are not mixing other young people with Title 16 youth. I could also understand why that decision is being made. How many Title 16 youth are currently at YSC?
we have
And I'm looking and it's 23. We had 34 youth awaiting placement that have been committed. We have 23 youth who are Title 16. It's my understanding you have 11 bed units. And so if I'm just doing the math, that would mean they are taking up 3 units.
No, they're taking up 2 units.
Okay. So do we have 12 in one
Yeah,
unit?
We house additional youth, either in that unit, in a temporary cot for overnight, or we would house them in the intake space during the overnight period.
What
within
are
the
some
program.
sorry about that. What are some other alternatives for placement, if not at YSC, for the Title 16 youth?
Well, the only other facility we operate is New Beginnings, and placing youth at New Beginnings then takes away our capacity to deliver treatment services for kids that are awaiting placement. So if you put those kids there, we're taking all those beds away from kids that are awaiting placement.
Okay, so of the 34 committed youth who are awaiting placement, how many of them are likely to end up at New Beginnings?
I can't say how many are likely to end up there. It really depends on what their treatment needs are and where we can find available services. I will tell you that sometimes we have to place a youth at New Beginnings that has a recommendation for a PRTF. No PRTF will take them. We will go and try to find a PRTF. If we don't find one, we will place them at New Beginnings and serve that young person, even though they were recommended for a PRTF. And so, yes, it can take time sometimes to get into New Beginnings, and you think, why not just place them directly in there? Because we're trying to match those kids to the needs that they have. But if we can't match them, then we're going to do the next best thing that we can do.
And how many open beds are there currently at New Beginnings?
We usually keep about 5 beds open at New Beginnings. So today we have 53 at New Beginnings. So out of a total of 60. So
We have about 7 free beds.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the reasons that you'll see some excess capacity there is that we did open a girls unit. We use it exclusively for girls. We don't have a full unit of girls there.
Yes. That leads me to another question. So for the restrictions that are placed on certain groups of young people, whether it's because they're girls, whether it's because they're Title 16 or what have you, how often does the facility need to move children around to comply with these mandated separations? Is that a daily, weekly?
The administration reviews the population every day. So every morning, our superintendent, assistant superintendents will review the population at YSC. Title 16 youth just to clarify, that's not a policy decision that we've made to house them separately. That's a legal
Yes.
finding that we have to house them
Understood.
separately. So that's not, I just wanted to be clear that it wasn't something we chose. And so those youth are kept in the 2 units that we have. We do try to separate girls from boys, although they do sometimes mix. We do have transgendered youth that have been housed on a female unit. And the population being as it is a challenge to manage all of the different potential conflicts that come up. So when we're full, as we are, or over full, moving a young person requires, moving other young people in order to make that happen. So our administrators review the population every day. We look at the situation with a multidisciplinary team to identify where kids have whether enemies or have safety concerns. We use restorative justice practices to try to address those concerns and place a youth safely into a unit where they're going to be able to get along with the other young people that are there.
I think I know the answer to this, but is the decision to house Title 16 youth at YSC likely to change anytime soon?
No.
No. Can you discuss which youth are housed in intake, for how long, and what services they receive? So today what we heard, and I've heard before, is that young people are tucked away in the intake areas as well as other areas, which impacts the services that they're receiving.
So when we have to use the intake rooms for young people, what we do is they sleep there at the intake unit, but they will be assigned to a living unit to program with. So they'll go to school with that unit, they'll go to the programs with that unit, and then at night they come back into the intake unit. The only exceptions to that are when we have a safety concern. And typically this happens with the Title 16 population more often because we have limited options with them. We can't use the other units as options. And so if they have conflicts with youth in both of the Title 16 units that we operate, we may have to place that youth separately.
So they are essentially housed on the unit for programming, and then they go back to sleep in the intake cells. What's the maximum number of young people that are on a unit due to moving I guess, overflow of young people back and forth? So normally it's 11 young people in
Sure.
a unit. You're moving kids from the intake area. What's the maximum number that you've had in a unit to accommodate that movement?
So like for when they're in education,
Sure, yes.
during the day, I believe we've gone up to about 15 in a classroom at a time. That's generally as high as it's gotten.
Okay. So 15. And what other services are likely impacted for the young people that are staying in the hospital suite or in the intake area?
Yeah, if they're staying in the intake area and programming with the other units, their regular units, they're
They
going to
would do
have all the
everything.
same
So
programs.
the sports or recreation, they would still do that
Yes,
with
they
them.
would go to the gym with them. They would go to lunch with them. They would go to all of the same things with that unit.
Okay. Staff, including both YDR and SYDR staff, report that sometimes the primary driver of housing decisions becomes placing youth in a location where they won't have conflicts with others. And that seems to align with what you're saying. Can you speak to how housing decisions are impacted with overcrowding? And so I know you're saying there's daily reviews of situations, but walk me through, what does that look like? Do you have incident reports, a map, or is the team sharing information about where one young person needs to be versus another?
So when a young person comes into YSC, we're going to have some information from our credible messengers, from our restorative justice folks, and they will identify potential conflicts while they're on the intake unit. So everybody would stay in normal circumstances on the intake unit or excuse me, the orientation unit, not the intake unit, for 5 days while we evaluate those matters. If we identify something, and for instance, I can give you an example of a young person where we did identify that there were conflicts. We may pause on placing them into a unit and say, okay, well, let's try to do a restorative justice with this young person. We're going to talk to the different kids in there. A lot of times young people will just straight up tell us, we're gonna go after this guy if you place him in our unit. Well, we don't want to place them in that unit then. But we do have to find a unit where we can place them. And so we will sit down and have a restorative circle with them, bring the young person that we're looking to place together with them.
But
And
beyond that, who's reviewing daily the placement decisions and making determination of who needs to move where in the facility?
ultimately, it's the superintendent, but they
Got
work
it.
as a team. We have 2 assistant superintendents that are totally plugged in, and they meet every day to review that.
Understood. Do you have an accounting of how long a young person has stayed in the intake area or the hospital suite because there isn't a proper unit facility available for them?
So the longest that we have, we had a youth that was at 19 days in the intake unit. The next longest was 6 days. Generally, we get them out of intake and into a unit and programming. It's those areas where we have a safety risk that we can't find a way to mitigate where we will hold them back.
And for these special areas like the hospital suite or the intake area, like what I saw when I was there are no bathrooms built in those rooms because that's not their use. So what does that look like? Are they
They're
They-
escorted to the bathroom when they
But do
need
they
to.
just knock and say, I have to go to the bathroom, whereas others are able to go?
Yeah, they don't have bathrooms in all of the rooms, and so they would have to alert a staff to be moved.
And there was an incident where a young person is reported to have used the bathroom on themselves because they were attempting to alert staff. And for whatever reason, staff didn't make it to them in time. Are you aware of this incident?
I am.
How often is that happening?
So let me just say, we did investigate that incident, and there was no evidence that the individual used the bathroom on themselves through that investigation. And what we further found in that investigation was that the youth did ask to go to the restroom. This was a young person that was a safety risk, that he was a risk to be attacked, not to be that he was a safety risk. And there were other youth on the floor, and the staff said, wait till I get the other youth off the floor, then we'll take you to the bathroom. And he was taken to the bathroom.
And so the information I was provided is that there is a detailed incident of the young person using the bathroom on themselves, but you're saying that.
We did not find evidence of that.
Got it. Have there been any incidents where a young person has used the bathroom on themselves or had a medical emergency, but staff couldn't get to them in time?
I'm not aware of any where anyone used the bathroom on themselves. We try to be responsive. Staff are required to check on youth regularly during the day. So it's not just that they have to, alert somebody. Somebody has to come around and look at them or view them regularly.
According to the incident rate data DYRS updated on yesterday, the rates of critical incidents, youth on youth assaults, and injuries to youth as a result of assaults all increased. This is aligning with a period of time where population trends are also increasing. Can you confirm this trend and just speak to what factors you think are contributing to higher assaults, higher incidents in the facility?
So I think the information I heard earlier in the testimony was looking at all incidents combined in both facilities. If you break out YSC and New Beginnings, the critical incidents at YSC are in line with historical numbers. I have it right here in front of me. We have had an increase in incidents, a significant increase in incidents at New Beginnings. And there are 4 youth that are primarily responsible for that increase. And we've had significant issues with them. Some of those youth have significant behavioral health challenges, and they act out frequently. We have a youth that has been returned from another program and has exhibited negative behaviors, but it's been really contained to these 4, causing the majority of those incidents. YSC's number, if you look, their critical incidence rate was 9.52 at the most recent reading, and that's not out of line. Is it above the prior month? It is, but it's not.
Because the prior month it was
about 8 per 1,000, but excuse me. Sorry, that's a 5.
Yeah, it was 5.
Right. So we will see
0.09. So it's a significant increase.
Right. But if you look at all of the prior months before that, that number is not out of the range that we typically see at YSC. But if you look at the number at New Beginnings, that is the one that is significantly higher.
But YSC, what are the contributing factors you think from last month to this month that explains that jump of nearly 4+ points in incidents?
It could be a number of things. Obviously, having a lot of youth in the facility makes it more challenging to manage young people. But I don't think that the population is the driver. Typically, what we see is that we have certain youth that are high rate of incidents. And when we have some of those people that have behavioral health issues and struggle to manage their behavior, they're very impulsive, we see an increase in incidents.
Okay, I want to turn to education, but I want to underscore something you said. Yes, overcrowding informs incidents and the safety and well-being of youth in the care. That is why we're having this conversation, and that is why we must act more urgently to address the situation. And so for those wondering, why are we having this hearing? That is why, because I believe it puts staff and young people in harm's way. How does overcrowding impact the use of classrooms? And so I just wanted to clarify, because what we heard, I want to say from the person testifying from the school project, was like some young people aren't able to go to classrooms. It's my understanding that education services are provided on the unit for young people. Can you clarify at YSC in particular what is happening in terms of education services?
So I'm not sure exactly what the school youth project was referring to, but she did mention that she had a number of kids that were Title 16. And as I mentioned earlier, when we have a Title 16 youth, we only have those 2 units that we can place a youth in if there is a safety issue. And so there is one young person that I'm familiar with who we attempted to place on a unit. He was assaulted, and we moved him back into the intake unit. That young person had an interruption in services. Generally speaking, when we're talking about when we use the classroom space for youth beds, we use temporary cots. They go into those cots, and then at the end of the night, in the morning, we pick all those up, return all of the classroom furniture in, and we operate the school in those classrooms. Sometimes if we're having significant conflicts within a unit, we may split the school or split the classroom and have half of the students in the classroom space and the other half in the living unit. And I think that was what folks were
And for
referring
that
to.
one young person, the Title 16 youth who has moved back to the intake area, are they currently there?
They're not.
They're not.
They,
And is that the young person, where are they now?
they're at the Department of Corrections.
Department of Corrections, because they aged out. I'm
Yes.
assuming. Okay. But for the period of time they were in the intake area, their services were interrupted, both for education, recreation, et cetera.
Yes.
Similar incident, if what I'm hearing there was that young person was attacked. There was another with the trans youth who was attacked, who was moved to New Beginnings in a medical unit. And the sentiment of that young person is, well, I feel like I'm being punished because now I'm being isolated. I can't do these activities. I'm not really receiving services. Have you explored like one-on-one services or one-on-one supports for those young people versus just kind of cutting them off?
No, that young person is at YSC and
they got moved back.
Yes.
But at the time that I spoke with them, they were at New Beginnings.
Right. We actually, before that happened, had placed her in a community placement. And unfortunately, that did not work out. And there was a violation that we had to bring her back in. So she is now back at YSC, and she is receiving services with young ladies.
Okay, but have you considered one-on-one in those instances where a young person has to be in the overflow area, to use the old church saying, that you're going to provide this one-on-one support to them versus saying, well, sorry, you're not going to.
There are times when we'll use one-on-one staff support, but that's not going to solve the issue of education. We don't have teachers that can just split off and provide education for the entire school day one-on-one with individuals. We do have to place them in a classroom.
Okay. I mean, in effect, what ends up happening is that young people in these instances, because they were attacked, are in solitary confinement. Not even with a bathroom where they have to alert someone that I need to go to the bathroom. And I know it may be a one-off incident, but that is in effect what is happening.
Well, no, because again, when we have a young person like the one that you're describing, they will program with a unit, and she is programming with a unit. So she sleeps at the intake area.
Or now, but there was a period of time, I'm not sure how many weeks, where she was at New Beginnings, isolated by herself, in distress, saying, you know, I'm by myself. It sounds like that Title 16 youth that you referenced before being transported to the Department of Corrections was isolated by
Yes.
themselves.
That
And
person
in
was.
effect, it creates a situation where there's isolation for them.
Right. And, you know, they're not literally by themselves. They do have staff with them. But, you know, I don't want to get too far into the details with an individual, but this young person had a number of enemies. And there was really no safe place to put him. Other youth, even in the intake area, attempted to assault this young person. It's a rare occurrence, but ultimately, I've got to prioritize safety over the other issues and the other services.
How is the agency gearing up to implement the Road Act?
So we have started recruitment for the positions that were funded. I will reiterate that the funded positions are not sufficient to implement the Road Act. Nevertheless, we have begun recruitment, and we've also developed procedures to comply with the terms of the Road Act. Now, those procedures, if we were able to do them in every case, would keep us in compliance with the Road Act. I can tell you right now, we don't have the resources to do it in every case. So we are going to do the very best that we can with the resources that we have, and we will attempt to comply with every portion.
But what specifically are you referencing when you say the procedures?
Well, you know, one of the things in the Road Act that was, I think, assumed is that we would get notice a month before a young person was committed to us. And in that period of time, we would be able to do the assessments and develop the individualized plan for the young person. And while that is the ideal, oftentimes we are not getting that 30 days. And so sometimes it's a direct commit.
You're not getting that from the courts.
Correct. And there's no requirement for them to do it. It was just an assumption. I know a lot of the testimony you heard was that, oh, they get 30 days, they get 30 days. But oftentimes we are not getting that amount of time. And so we have developed sort of two sets of procedures. One, if we get notice in time in that 30-day period, that we would execute the meetings that are required, that we would have, you know, an immediate home review, that we would go and start developing that YLS and schedule the meeting with the stakeholders that are required in the Road Act to hear the plan prior to the dispositional hearing. But if we get a commitment and they just say, well, here's a committed youth, obviously that's just not going to play out. And we have to now take a youth directly into that awaiting placement status without the benefit of having that.
As a
ramp up.
follow-up, can you share those procedures with the committee?
Yeah.
Both for if you receive that notice and if not, and I hear what you're saying, like if we don't get the 30-day advance notice and someone is showing up or we receive notice like they are coming, it kind of throws the timeline off. And I think that is understandable. What I would push to say is then let's figure out how we address that problem so that you are more consistently receiving notice. And I know we're dealing with the courts and we don't have jurisdiction over to make them do anything, but that's certainly something we can advocate for.
Yeah, and we've been in communication with the courts and with court social services to try to expedite receiving information and getting those things in time. And so I don't want to present it as they're being an obstacle. But I think that sometimes you have situations where a prosecutor executes a plea agreement or some other sort of legal maneuver that moves them directly into commitment status without that, notice.
So am I to understand that your implementation of the Road Act is contingent on hiring these individuals that you're looking for now?
Yes.
Or are you already implementing those procedures you've put in place?
Well, we are attempting to implement the procedures without the additional staff. But we are also recruiting for those staff. We do not have anybody on staff to schedule the meetings. The part that we are implementing is on completion of the YLS.
Okay. Related to that.
And if I could just add one more
Yes.
thing about the remedies, there is a remedy in the statute that allows us to petition the court. I do think that that's a cumbersome method. So if we didn't get notice, we can make a petition to the court and go to court and say we need more time. But that just puts a lot of extra administrative burden on something that we're trying to do faster, not slower. And so I think we need to sort of think about how that could be done more efficiently. And it may not require a change to the statute. It may be something that we can work out with the court by just having a communication line where we say, hey, can we get a little more time and not have a hearing?
And we will have a hearing on the Road Act in particular. I believe that's slated for next month, but it sounds like the agency is moving forward. I look forward to receiving those procedures. I wanted to switch gears slightly in terms of the strategies for dealing with the YSC youth population. So how often is it that young people are diverted from YSC?
Well, they're not diverted from YSC. Diversion is a tool.
Or let's say I'm trying to find a placement for this young person, or I'm trying to get approval from Medicaid for this special support program, and for whatever reason it's not working. Is there ever a diversion to say, okay, we're going to switch gears and either send them to New Beginnings or we're going to send them to a community-based placement or what have you?
Well, sometimes when there are delays with Medicaid, we will go ahead and place in a PRTF if we have a PRTF that's accepting that young person and eat the cost until we get the Medicaid piece done. So it's not that we would just stop everything because we didn't get Medicaid reimbursement. We have an obligation to safeguard the taxpayers' dollars and seek that reimbursement where we can.
And
But
as a follow-up, do you have discretion to, and I'm using the term divert, and maybe that's not the technical term, but do you have the discretion to divert any youth from YSC that once they are committed?
once a youth is ordered to YSC, detained, we have no discretion to remove them from YSC unless they're committed and we're moving them into a placement.
But once they are committed, do you have discretion for any young person to switch gears, let's say, and say you're going to go, you have discretion where they end up essentially?
Yes, we do.
Got it. Are there budgetary or any budgetary restrictions that are informing the overcrowding at YSC?
We are working through those budget issues. I think that what we've seen is an increase in number of committed kids, and the budget has to catch up with that.
That's right.
So we had the mayor put supplemental of about a little over $7 million into last year's budget to address that. And we are working right now, and we've already met with the mayor's budget team to address it in the 26th.
It would be great if we could just fund it on the front end versus having to play catch up behind the
Totally
scenes.
agree.
Yes. But what you're also speaking to, I also introduced legislation recently that would account for our laws, our criminal justice laws, because what has happened in effect, especially since the pandemic, is that we've created a number of policies that have consequences, i.e. more young people being detained. But yet we have not accommodated the agency to account for that increased population. And so the legislation would say that as we're going through our financial analysis process for these criminal safety bills, which usually are reported as having zero costs, that we would take into account the residual impacts of those bills, because they do in fact have a cost, because that's money needed to house them, support them, educate them, feed them, et cetera, on agencies like DYRS. And so that's my 2 cents, that I do appreciate the strain that sometimes can come there. I wanted to come to staffing ratios. The committee has heard reports of units with more than 8 youth having 1 YDR to supervise them. Consequently, YDRs allow youth out of their cells in smaller groups, and thus youth spend more time in their cells. In fact, we heard testimony today about that. What is the standard staffing ratio, and what shifts when the facility is overcrowded?
So it's 1 staff to each 8 youth is the staffing ratio that we operate under. That is driven by federal law. Actually, the Prison Rape Elimination Act dictates that. If we do not have enough staff on a unit, and typically this is going to happen when we have a call out without notice or someone does not show up for their shift, that's when we're going to encounter that situation where we have to do what's called split time or split floor time. And so we will take out and rotate youth out of their rooms to maintain that 1 to 8 staffing ratio while we are looking to either identify a volunteer for overtime or draft somebody from another shift to come in. And so it's for that
But
period of
even
time.
on an 11 person unit, you would need 2 people.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of the youth would stay in their room while the others came out, and then they would switch after a period of time until we could get that other staff onto the floor.
And how often or how likely is it that all of the youth on a unit have to be in their cells because there's a staffing issue?
I'm not aware of any situations, at least not recently, that all youth had to stay on their rooms.
And so your standard policy, you would say, is that at least half are out at any given time when there is a strain on staffing.
Right.
How are things with staffing? That has been a reoccurring issue for the agency. Where are we today?
So if you look at our number of filled positions, we look really good. The sort of hidden number in there is staff unavailable to work. And that number is quite high. I believe we have 64 or 67 staff.
That's bizarre.
That are unavailable to work.
Let's just pause there. 67 people. I'm assuming many of them on leave of some sort, medical leave,
protected leave,
bereavement leave. And what's the longest amount of time that you've experienced someone being on leave across those categories?
They can use all of their PFL time. They could use, if depending on the circumstances, if they're on some kind of workers' compensation issue, if there's a claim there, that will just depend on how long a physician says they're unavailable to work. They could use FMLA if they have family members. So it depends on the circumstances, but we've seen people, for an entire year not be available.
And I know in this last budget process, we attempted to address some of that by shifting parameters of our paid family program, especially for government workers. because it's clear to me that some people are abusing the system. Now, there are some people that are genuinely on leave. There are others that are abusing the system. And I think we should just be clear-eyed about that.
Absolutely.
I also am aware it's a difficult job. And so I imagine there is mental strain and other issues that come about. But you have about 64, 67 members that are on leave right now. How does that compare to earlier this year, when we had conversations about staffing?
My staff year's updated me that it's actually 72, so I must have a
72.
older number. So if we look back at previous years, I looked back to about 2020 or 2022 maybe. That unavailable list was, I think, 34 staff. So we are significantly higher than what I would call the norm.
And so then when someone's done with leave, walk me through that process. Do they then just come back to the agency?
So that we have a return to work process. We have a dedicated staff that evaluates all of these situations. And what we're trying to do now is identify an alternative work location for that staff. So if, for instance, they have a medical note that says they can't lift heavy objects or do something like that, we will try to find them an office job to come in and do something for the agency. We have historically tried to use them within the same, building. If they're a YSC employee, we would want to use them at YSC, but we've run out of sort of posts that we can put them on. So we're bringing folks into headquarters. We're bringing them into the achievement centers to try and get something out of them. While they're on leave. Obviously, people that are injured, we have no interest in trying to speed them to come back until they're healed up and they're ready. We want them to do what they need to do, but it also gives us an ability to oversee those staff and identify the ones that may be gaming the system. So that we can try and take action. So we have worked with risk management to try to identify strategies of how we can ferret out any fraud. When somebody has been cleared to return to work by their physician, we return them promptly. So we have a staff that is monitoring that at all times. I think where we have difficulty is that most doctors are going to write whatever note a person asks them to do. And so what we really need to have is a sort of alternative state medical director to review those and ensure that they're
Is that
legitimate.
something you're working toward?
Yeah, it's something we're working with DCHR. They do have a position, but it is vacant right now. And so that has been a problem.
And legally, would it be permissible to say that in order for you to acquire leave, you would have to go through our state authorized medical authority versus your own personal doctor?
Well, we have the right to review it.
Understood.
Yes.
Understood. I wanted to come back to education. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I wanted to come back to education. And I wanted to see where things stand. So this came up a little bit earlier. There is a staffing issue even for the folk who are contracted to provide education services. In this instance is Maya Angelou. And in the budget, we allotted more money for them to do several things, hire more teachers, buy technology to make sure that they are able to cover the entire facility and the number of young people. Maya would say, well, we were contracted to provide services for X number of young people. As we all are talking about today, YSC has many more young people than they are contracted. And it's not so much we don't want to provide the services. I'm persuaded by the fact that they just don't have the bandwidth to cover as many young people. Where are we today with getting the money out of the door that the council approved so that they could hire more teachers and purchase technology?
So OCP has been negotiating with Maya, and my understanding is that they have an agreement for additional funds, as well as the language change to the contract that we've discussed,
Mhm.
so that we're not using a cap of a number of kids, but rather a number of classrooms. I don't believe that it's been signed, sealed, and delivered, but they have met, and there is
But they're working towards it.
agreement.
And so it would be reasonable that in the next month's time, there hopefully should be a ratified contract
I believe
so that we can get these services. And that is including the additional funding that we provided on a one-time basis. Is that correct?
We did not use it in that way. We did a recurring funding situation because frankly, one-time money is just not.
What does that mean?
That means that we've increased the value of the contract, not just this year, but in future years as well.
But what I'm struggling with is the agency doesn't have the authority to make that decision. So the council makes appropriations in the law.
Well, we have the ability to contract. And so we're modifying the contract. We just have to find the funding to do it.
That is, yeah, today we are having conversations about agency overspending. It is wildly inappropriate, I would argue, for the executive to say, yeah, the council passed this, yeah, the council authorized this, we're going to do our own thing. And while I'm happy that there's movement in establishing a new contract, I certainly will follow up to ensure that the intent behind the additional resources.
Clarify.
Yeah.
The agreement that we have is the same agreement that we offered before the council made any changes. So it's the additional money that we had initially offered because we were exceeding the 88 youth that was in that contract. So I believe it's like $340,000 per year in exchange for the change in terms. So
which is to move away from the number of young people, but to identify the number of units. And we don't have to negotiate a contract here in the hearing, but it doesn't account for, as an educator, it would give me pause that we wouldn't account for the number of young people. You can't say one teacher is going to teach in this one unit, potentially 15 to 20 young people, when the ratio should be 8 to 11.
But we can't control the numbers that come in there. And we can't put ourselves in a position where we make a contract that we put an artificial number or a cap on, and then we're back at the bargaining table every time because we violated the terms of the contract.
I do sympathize with that. It begs to question the quality of services that one could provide when you have 15, 20 young people in a unit because of overflow or overcrowding at all different age ranges and abilities.
There is another piece to this that I'll advise you that we were able to procure tablets, and we are using those tablets in lieu of Maya procuring their own tablets. We can push education materials.
That is a big win. And I remember we talked about that during oversight season.
Yes.
Yes.
So those have been acquired.
And will that be one-to-one tablet use?
Yes.
Or?
Every youth will have a tablet.
Nice.
And we'll also, every youth will have a tablet. I'm also looking to host one in each of the living units as well, because these tablets can be used for phone calls and other things.
And I'm imagining part of that will provide autonomous education services or programming. They could be on a computer program where it doesn't necessarily require.
Right. So they could be in the same classroom, but having different material and content coming through.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Do you know offhand vendors that we could talk about it, but I would be interested what education programming you're looking at for something like that.
Well, we're looking at Maya for the programming.
Well, I know I'm talking about the electronic programming,
right,
or the apps or the programs that, and there are certainly recommendations that I'm happy to make,
I'd love
so that we can provide as quality of programming as possible. I wanted to come to the housing for girls. How many girls are at YSC currently?
We have 18 today.
And how many units are they taking up?
Currently, they're in one unit. And so, again, we have flexed and opened a second unit at times. Generally, we're not going to do that unless we can use every bed because of the population situation that we're in. So if I'm under 22, we're going to keep one unit and house the excess as we've described.
And so that means 11 are in sales, and then the other, I think you said 18 or 19, the other 8 are in cots in the unit itself.
Yes. Yes, they would be in cots for sleeping arrangements.
And what does that mean for their belongings? I know you spoke about removing the cots, but like,
well, generally they don't have belongings with them. We keep that stuff when they come into the facility.
I mean, but I've been there. I've seen books. I've seen pictures. I've seen cleaning or like soap or.
Right, but we provide that as needed. So let me just explain how we move those kids. The kids that we use the cots for are going to be the young people that have we've had the most experience with, that have the best behavior. We also have a higher staff to youth ratio for those youth. So we will use 1 to 4 for kids that are in the education space for sleeping arrangements.
So I would imagine there's 5 adults in that unit with the 18 girls then.
Well, no, 1 to 4 is the daytime requirement.
For programming.
Yes.
But then you are likely splitting the girls, that all 18 wouldn't be out at one time.
Well, they may be out. Sometimes they'll be on split time, and then that has happened with the female population. Currently, they are not doing split time.
Okay. Just zooming out, it seems what I've heard from you is that the executive's perspective is that unification is a goal, and unification meaning that we can consolidate more of the placement and the systematic decisions with the agency versus across our broader system and with our federal partners. I support that. If I'm being realistic, though, that doesn't seem like a realistic outcome in the next 3 months, 6 months, year. It is a worthy goal, but a longer prospect. I'm still struggling with what the agency is doing in the short term, in the next 3 months, to address the overcrowding piece. I hear you saying, well, I'm hiring people for the Road Act. It would be great to say we're going to double down on this because we think this is going to address it. But like, what is the short-term fix?
Absolutely. We prioritize getting youth placed, and we have to speed up placements. That will help. And when we look at the data for placements, we actually came pretty close to our goal in the third quarter. Goal is to place youth within 30 days on average, and we were at 47 days in the third quarter. Then we had the budget issue with Congress and the freeze that was concomitant with that, and that placed us, sort of behind where we want to be. And so that overall average length of stay was 69 days for the fiscal year, but it ballooned up to 89 days during that period of time when everything got gummed up with budget. I think that when we have our budget and we don't have any sort of intervening events that stop us from placing kids, we can get that population down. Other than that, that is literally the only tool that we have at our disposal to bring that population down. The next fastest thing that we can do is try to acquire that facility in Maryland. Because it is a, fully built facility. We don't have to go through the capital process and wait on construction and all the other things. And I'm working as fast as I can and as diligently as I can. And it's not something that came recently. I've made that request over a year ago and have reiterated that request now that there's been a change in their secretary.
So
over there.
is it fair to say our short-term goal or strategy rather, not goal, our short-term strategy is to accelerate placements and keep doubling down on that work? Midterm strategy is to secure this facility or continue working towards securing that facility. Longer term strategy is unification of our system.
Yes, that's fair.
That is fair. Okay. So as it relates to that short-term strategy, I want our committee to continue to work with the agency to do everything possible that we can to speed up placements. We heard folks testifying. While I see Mama Joe in the room, I would be remiss not to ask about parent engagement. How is that impacted when the facility is overcrowded? So when you have young people in intake or you have young people in the hospital suite or elsewhere, how is like visitation impacted?
It can be impacted if we have a staffing issue, but we prioritize trying to keep our visitation schedule as it is. We have a flexible visitation policy so that you don't have to come on the day that you're, the sort of normal visitation days. You can schedule time with us. We do have family members that avail themselves of that. We do have a partnership with Parent Watch, and they are very supportive of the families and doing sort of the extras that we need for some families that have young children and can't find childcare in order to visit their kid. They can, bring their kids, and we can put them in that area where Parent Watch's offices are and provide snacks or games. And otherwise keep them occupied while their parent visits the child in detention. So we continue to do those services.
Understood. Okay. That concludes the questions I had for you. As a follow-up again, I'm requesting that you share the procedures for the Road Act that you've established, both if you are provided notice and if you're not. But I'm also happy to give you the last word as it relates to overcrowding within the facility.
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your support, Chairman Parker. I know that these are difficult issues that we're confronting. And I appreciate how you have been a problem-solving partner with us. And I think that's what we really need, is to come up with strategies that we can implement to deal with this. I will say that I do really believe that if we complete a unification of the system, we can get far better results and manage this detention population. I do have experience with this and have been successful when we have those tools available to us. And so I look forward to having those discussions with you and the committee and the rest of the council.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And with that, we will call to a close this roundtable on overcrowding at the Youth Services Center for DYRS. I want to thank all of our witnesses for providing testimony today. For anyone who was unable to testify today, written testimony is encouraged and will be made part of the official record. If you testified and did not submit your written testimony, we would ask that you submit that. The record will be open for an additional 2 weeks. Anyone who is interested may submit additional testimony to our committee by emailing tfranco@dccouncil.gov. You can find that information on the council website as well. Thomas Franco is our committee director. And the record will formally close at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, October 30th. With that, the business before the committee being concluded, the time is now 4:36, and this public oversight roundtable is adjourned. Thank you.